That's just the way it's set up. Ooh,
Can do that.
I like me. I like me on that picture. You're like my sidekick. I'm Johnny Carson and you're Ed McMahon. Do you have a BB gun?
Ooh. I don't, but I have a club.
All right, welcome. It is another beautiful day in Indiana. I'm here, Curt Austin, with my friend Dave Mullins.
Hey, Curt, how you doing, man?
Doing fine. And we are pondering Psalm 83. And so we're so glad that you've joined us. If you've been following along, we've been doing one psalm every day for a week. We've been reading it. And so then we get together and we just talk about kind of what jumped off the page for us, or what we perceive to be maybe what the deeper meaning is, or how that applies to us in the life that we're living each and every day. So glad you're here. Psalm 83. We started with Psalm 69, so we're slowly moving through the Psalms. And hopefully this is ministering to your heart as much as it is ours. So, whether you ever watch this, whether anybody ever watches this, I think we'll keep doing it because it really does minister to my soul.
Yeah, and one day I'm sure our grandkids will love watching these.
This is all they're going to get as an inheritance, so I hope they love watching
There you
this.
go.
This is what they'll...
There you go. We
Hey,
got
kids,
150
if you're
video kids.
That's right. If you're watching this, I'm dead. So, I mean, there you go. So, all right. So, Psalm 83, Dave. Let's just dive right in. What do we know
right.
about it? What'd you think this week?
Well, it was an interesting psalm.
Yeah.
I will say that. Kind of, I'm not sure if it was actually a lament or, what to really say as far as a genre. Any thoughts on genre, Curt?
Well, I thought it primarily just a prayer. I
Okay.
think it cries out to God.
Yeah.
Again, Asaph is consistent in his historical narratives of sharing just a little bit about this is where we've been, and I think he always does that. At least that's my impression, that he's always doing that to put it in context of where we've been and where we want to go. And I think this is very similar to that. It starts out with the intro of the maybe the lament or the cry to God in verse 1 and verse 2. It starts out that way and ends up with kind of like he has ended in several of them. This is the hope that we have. This is what you could bring to us, God.
Yeah. Yeah, I did think it's interesting, the contrasting verse 1 and verse 2. God, don't be silent, because guess what? Your enemies aren't. Don't you hear the uproar of your enemies? See that they're arrogant, rising up. And then, there is, I see a progression, asking God not to be silent, and then don't you hear their uproar. Look, they're devising crafty schemes. And then we actually hear what they're saying. Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence. And this would be a big deal. I mean, for God and salvation history. I mean, not just for them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, for them. It would be.
We'll let it pass. No big
Yeah,
deal.
yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Because Israel was God's chosen people. Israel was to, be the light, and they're going to snuff out the light. And if Israel's gone, I think the psalmist is saying, what's that mean to you, God, at that point?
Yeah, certainly. I've heard people say, that Israel was, or that the church is Plan A. That's something that I've heard a lot of times. Well, technically, Israel is Plan A.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's really what God had chosen from Abraham, beginning with Abraham all the way through. This is what I want for you, is for you to be the people who reflect all of the characteristics of God. And then so Asaph in this particular psalm is discussing the fact that you're gonna, if you don't act, everything that you had planned, it will go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And prior psalms of Asaph were, this is, things are hard, there's destruction, but this is, our enemies are fighting against us. This takes it to the highest level of where there's this alliance that's happening with all the nations that are listed in this psalm, and there are quite a few that have come together to say we're going to wipe you off the face of the earth.
Now, I think I want to bring up maybe a connection point with our own lives, because sometimes, this is like back then. I saw one commentator connect this with Ephesians 6 about the principalities, the powers of the air, the schemes that are
Right.
working against us. And so, some of those principalities, whatever you want to name them or call them, kind of seem to have the same goal of destroying, our lives, or at least our life of faith. And so for me, that's kind of a connection point between my life and this psalm.
And you can take this psalm, and I'm sure, I don't know how this has been used through the centuries in the Hebrew community, but you certainly, in World War II, this had to have just jumped off the page to them as the Holocaust is happening. And I think even today, if you're in a Jewish community, when white supremacy is targeting the Hebrews, the Jewish people, then it's got to be it's got to resonate in the same way. And I think, picking up there with verse 5, they signed a treaty, there's alliance, and then he
Yeah.
runs through all of these folks that have signed off on this treaty, and Assyria has even joined them too. So I agree with you. I read one place where it was like it's hard to kind of nail down when this is actually written, because
Yeah.
it's kind of general the way it's done. But I think that also adds credibility when you're talking about how the people have suffered over time.
Yeah. And so it could be a late, a late psalm, because this is the list, and mentioning
Yeah.
Assyria puts it a little bit later, but then it has there are a lot allied with the descendants of Lot, which I don't know if I should bring this up or not, but the descendants of Lot, there's some indication that it could have been the incest between Lot and his daughters, because they had kids by their father. And if you want to know how all that played out, you can take a look in Genesis.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that for whatever reason he doesn't mention the Moabites, and I forget what the other group would be in this list, but instead he just says the descendants of Lot, kind of, I think, to indicate that their origin story, so to speak.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, go on to, so this is the list, right?
yeah,
I mean,
this
this
is
is
the
just the
list,
list,
and
but then
it's
it moves on.
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because again, that progression of don't be silent. Do you hear the uproar? They're crafting schemes. This is their scheme. Let us wipe out Israel. And it says, and they made this treaty. This was their unanimous decision. Whose? Well, then he goes through the list, and
Yeah.
so there's a definite progression throughout this psalm, and it continues. And now in verse 9, he's saying, do to them as you did to these other folks.
Yeah. And I like, I don't, we've talked about the fact we don't love the war. We don't love the killing. We don't love,
Yeah.
that's not what stands out to us as what's beautiful about these Psalms. But what he's doing is he's running down the list of then probably places that were very familiar to the hearers of this Psalm
Oh yeah.
as part of their history.
Yeah.
And so they were able to remember the stories of about Sisera and Jabin, right, at the Kishon River. And so, if you grew up, I don't know, if you grew up in History 101 Jewish, Hebrew school, and, you listen to the history lessons, you would know about these things
Yeah.
and how they played out in these. And, we don't recognize them, but
And
but they're
and I
listed there.
Yeah, and I think this section is important for what's coming. Again, there's a definite progression, and it's almost like he's setting us up in some ways as we continue on. So, do to them as you did to the Midianites, and he goes through this list of what God has done, because they said, "Let us seize for our own use."
Mm-hmm.
I just noticed that, for our own use, these pasture lands of God. They were to be for God, but we're going to use it for our own use. And I could really go off on that for quite a while, but
Yeah, let's not move
I
on to
will
the next
not.
slide.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then once again, there is this progression: scatter them like tumbleweed, chaff before the wind, and then it goes from the wind to a fire, and it goes from the fire to a fierce storm. So there, you're continuing through on that progression.
So in this section, though, I think it's important to point out, or well, at least what jumped off at me, is that you have a God. The prior Psalm, Psalm 82, was about the God who's a judgment over the gods. All right,
Yeah,
and I really like this in that it has the God who is in charge of all nature
yeah,
again, and that is a theme throughout the Old Testament, is reinforcing the fact that God is the God of, he's not a nature God. He's not a God of wind or God of thunder. Like if you had a God that was just assigned to those things, he's
like
in charge of
Thor.
all of it.
Thor isn't Thor
Right,
like the
yeah.
god of thunder? But,
Yeah.
just thunder. So
Yeah, and he's in charge of all of those things, the wind, the fire, the fierce storms.
yeah,
God is able to control all of those things, and I think almost Asaph's writing of this is a reminder to God. This is who you are, God. Remember what you did? Oh my God, scatter them
yeah.
like. But is also again a reminder to the people reading this. We don't serve a weak God. We serve a mighty God.
But I think
Terrifying.
there's even more here.
Well, you always think there's more. You never
Well,
are satisfied with just a little
no,
bit.
no. I want two pieces of cake at the wedding.
Oh, you'll get it. You'll get your two pieces of cake. All
But
right.
chase them with your fierce storm, terrify with your tempest. Now, are you ready? Are you ready? There's a twist here. Utterly disgrace them until they what?
Well, yeah. Submit.
Submit to your name. That is the goal here. The goal isn't to utterly destroy them. The goal is to get them to come to the realization that you've been talking about, Curt, that he
Yeah.
is God. And
Yeah.
until the problem here is the fact that they're not submitting to God. They're using the pasture lands for their own purposes, what was meant for God's purposes. And again, our lives are the same way. What are we going to use our lives for? For our own purposes, for our own glory, for our own honor, or are we going to use our lives and the life we've been given, the gift, for God's purposes? So there's
Yeah.
some connections there. Let them be ashamed and terrified forever. Let them die in disgrace. Then they will learn. Then they will learn that you alone are called the Lord. And really, that I think is the point of this psalm.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is the bottom line of the whole story is, um, while we enter into any situation and we feel that God is not listening, that God cannot hear. The truth is God is hearing all of that,
Yeah.
and that God is in charge of all of that. He is the supreme over all the earth. And so we fool ourselves when we think that we are walking through the fires alone. We
Yeah.
fool ourselves when we feel that everyone is working against us, because in fact God is working for us.
Yeah.
It's when we turn our attention, and we've said this multiple times, and maybe it's because we believe in it so strongly, but when we abandon ourselves to God and His purposes, then we understand who God truly is and who we truly are in the midst of that. We're not worms. We're absolutely loved by God,
Yeah.
and responding to that and seeking Him as the one who protects us and loves us and guides us.
Yeah, but I can understand the psalmist's frustration, though. Seeing what he's seeing, experiencing what he's experiencing, because there are times in movies, and I can't think of one right now, but when the hero of the movie, the all-powerful hero, is being kind of beat upon, and someone will say, why isn't he doing anything? Why is she just taking it? Why isn't she, or he or whomever? And there's I guess it's not a confusion there, and so the psalmist begins with, don't be silent. Can't you hear what's going on? Because there's a confusion, because you are the most high, you're supreme over all the earth. And so do these things so that they submit to you, just as we're submitting to you. And so I guess for me right now, in this moment, Curt, the question this psalm asks of me is, am I actually truly submitting to the supreme over all the earth?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Where,
And
where do I
think
stand on this?
it's a question we have to ask ourselves all the time. And so, if you were reading, let me not say if you, as I was reading this week, this psalm was an odd one to read.
Yeah.
Last
Oh,
week's
yeah.
was unique, as Dave called it, a unicorn. It was a very unique. There was no other psalm like it. This is similar in the fact that there's a lot of history lesson in here that really is intended to take us to this end point.
Yeah.
But it's not history we're familiar with necessarily.
Right.
Right. It's not the parting of the Red Sea. It's not feeding them manna and quail. It's a kind of a history lesson that maybe doesn't align. But here's the thing: all of us have our own history that nobody else knows about. Those moments when we were at our very lowest that nobody is privy to, right? And yet God does. God knows.
Yeah.
We know, and God knows, and He will take us through those, whether it requires wind or fire or storm, and He will take us to the other side. And the idea is that God doesn't want to disgrace or shame us, but He wants us to figure out how we will learn to call on God alone.
Yeah. And the reality of the psalm is, he asks the question, God, don't you hear? Don't you see? The answer is yes, God does.
Yeah. Yep.
But sometimes God's purposes are purposes that we cannot see and we cannot understand. So that's why when we abandon ourselves to Him, it is in deep trust and faith that He is the Lord. And I guess there should be a period there,
I think so. I think so.
He
I
is
think
the Lord.
This was an interesting psalm. I enjoyed it this week. I felt like it was not instructive necessarily, but certainly interesting to read.
Yeah.
If for nothing else, to try and figure out what the names were, how you pronounced all those names through it.
We didn't even run through the names.
No, that was intentional. Moabite. We could do Moabite and Lot. We were able to do Lot.
Lot, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
folks, not every psalm is going to just touch the heartstrings for you every time you read it. Maybe a year from now, you'll be in a different place and you'll read that and you'll go, gosh, that
But I
hits
think
home.
every psalm can. The potential is there.
Well, that's what I mean. It
Potential is
depends
there.
on it. I think part of it is where are you in your life's journey, and what is it that God wants to say to you through that.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I'm really excited about 84, which is next week. I'm not reading ahead. I'm just so that we understand there are 12 verses in Psalm 84. It's one of the
Well, before the show, you talked
probably.
about the 6 commentaries you've been reading on Psalm 84, and just
No, I don't even own 6 commentaries. But Psalm 84 is probably one that is very familiar. So if you jump in and you start to read that, if you've just joined us for the first time and you get to pick up on Psalm 84, good for you. You'll start on an upper. It's very familiar in the canon. It's kind of almost, as you start to read it, you go, oh yeah, I've heard a lot of this before, or I remember reading this. You'll like it a lot. So join us again next week. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on YouTube, and
just don't follow
and
closely in your car.
that's right. Yeah, because I put on my brakes every time. That just drives me crazy. So thanks for joining us, and I hope that you have a great week, and we'll see you back here in about 7 days. We'll talk to you then.
Yes.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Ready? 901. Psalm 83. Take one.
Take one. Where'd that come from?
Well, now we have to do take two. All right.
No, I tried not to laugh, but I'm thinking, let's just take one stuff. How many things are we going to do?
Well, we've done it plenty of time. All right. Psalm 83. Pondering Psalms, Psalm 83, take two.